Folks, welcome to the Jake Feinberg Show here in Mill Valley, California, with a beautiful human being and an iconic musician and roots, folk, bluegrass music, world music. Peter Rowan, welcome back to the Jake Feinberg Show.
Jake, it's good to be with you again, man. Howdy, howdy.
You know, one thing we've actually never vetted before is your rock and roll inklings. You talk about Chuck Berry, and then cats coming to you. I mean, you play the 12-string guitar, but I mean, can you talk about the rock and roll bands that?
Well, yeah, I was 14. I was actually 12 years old when I first started playing the ukulele, learning from my Uncle Jim, and my dad bought me a little McAfee built Islander uke when I was 12, and I learned the chords. I'd seen my great uncle play, George Wallace, up there in Fitchburg, and I was strumming on a squash racket or a badminton racket until my dad gave me a ukulele, and I started doing that. But the music that we were listening to was the Everly Brothers. And Elvis had just started coming out, and I would come home from school and I'd turn on the black station, WILD in Boston, and that was a station that played gospel music in the afternoon. And one day I came home from school about 2:30 in the afternoon, and I turned on the radio to hear the gospel music that I liked, and all of a sudden it was Buddy Holly singing "That'll Be the Day." And I thought, well, okay, I listened to it. And I changed the channel, and it was on the next station. And I looked all over the dial that afternoon. That was the birth of payola.
Wow.
When all the DJs were being paid to break a record, what they call breaking a record, meaning breaking it out of it's making it well known to the public. Breaking a record is what they call it. And
that turned into a scandal, did it not?
It did.
It did, yeah.
It shut down all the people and all the DJs in Boston and once I heard that music, and that was the beginning, and Elvis was on the cover of Life magazine, which my parents bought. The Everly Brothers were on the radio, and then, Buddy Holly he really engaged my ear. There was a little Spanish flavor to the music, but it was so unique with the black background singers and everything, so I became obsessed with Buddy Holly, and I formed a band called the Cupids. And my best friend at the time, Bobby Emmerich, played guitar. Well, actually, before we got guitars, we had our ukuleles, and I remember one day after seeing Elvis on the cover of Life magazine with his guitar strapped on with a strap, and he was looking down at some girl, giving her the eye, and the audience was pointing at her. And it was the phenomena of Elvis. And so immediately, my friend Bob Emery, who was my singing partner at the time, took a dog leash and made a ukulele strap out of it. And that was like it was all over after that. Once he put the dog leash strap on the ukulele, it was like we were singing Everly Brothers harmonies, and one of my schoolmates' name was Chris Scott, and he was studying to play drums as a young kid. He was about 13. And so we started, our parents would drive us over and we would play in their living room. And Chris had all the instruments. His dad bought him, there was a Fender Telecaster that I used.
Wow.
There was a Silvertone. And his dad was really into music, and he saw his son's interest. So he gave him a full set of drums and a couple of amps and stuff. So we started transposing all our ukulele knowledge to the guitars, which was inevitable anyway. And about 14, turning 15, Chris was a year older. He turned 16 and got his license. We kind of messed around for about a year, just fooling around. As soon as he got his license, we started getting gigs around Boston with the local DJs doing sock hops. And that was just the music of the time, there was nothing else accessible. Although I had heard of bluegrass on the radio, as I had heard Irish music, it was just more music. You know, the music of our generation was a rhythmic explosion. Black music came to the foreground, and I used to listen. And funny enough, Taj Mahal and I used to both listen to a station out of Buffalo, New York, called WKBW, and there was a guy on that station, and this is a good thing for you to follow up.
Sure.
Because there's been a lot of information added to the web on this man and his whole approach. His name was George Lorenz, which is probably short for Lorenzo or something. Anyway, George Lorenz was out of Buffalo, New York, on WKBW, and his name, his radio name was George the Hound Lorenz, and that's when I heard the original of "You Ain't Nothing But a Hound Dog," Big Mama Thornton, I think it was.
It was your first exposure. The gospel music of what kind of gospel music was like
rockin' gospel music.
Yeah.
But George Lorenz was playing Bill Doggett, honky tonk. He played some things like Dwayne Eddy. He played a few things, but mostly it was R&B.
Right.
So Taj Mahal, who lived over in Springfield, about 40 miles from where I was, at the same time, we were listening to that guy, and I saw Taj a year or so ago over in Hawaii at the Kauai Bluegrass Festival, the Kauai Folk Festival, and I said, "You remember the theme song in the beginning?" I said, "Was that Bill Doggett?" He said, "No, man, it was this guy," and he dialed it up. He had it on his phone. The theme music to George Lorenz and the Hound was a saxophone guy, an early rock and roll saxophone player. But I say this because you can look it up. You can find it. Taj found it, and so we're hearing this influx of R&B, and yet the music of the Cupids, we did "Ain't That a Shame," and it's fast domino stuff, you know, and the division between blues and country was not a distinction in my mind.
Absolutely.
We didn't do any country, but I wrote ballads, and I started writing then when I was about 13 or 14. I wrote a song called Crazy Joe about a guy. I'll play it for you. You want to hear it?
I'd love to. The audience would too. I'm curious about, I mean, that's...
I'll just give you an idea.
Please.
So, you know, I mean, Buddy Holly was I think we were 14, 15. He was probably 18 or 19, you know. So, yeah. I met a guy named Crazy Joe. Said, "Now, Joe, where is it to go?" He said, "Come on, can move your legs and get ready to roll. Down to the corner we could rock and roll. Now, Crazy Joe, rocking on the corner. Crazy Joe, with his band that plays the morning, well, he rocks all night, up until the dawning." You know, it turns out the principal of the school loves rock and roll too. You know, so
Yeah, right.
so that's a happy ending. And the other one was, you know, very much R&B. Remember, my darling, when you said we never part. Remember, my darling, you said you never break my heart. like in the Everly Brothers
That's beautiful,
harmony.
man.
So we had harmony. See, we had vocal harmony, and that just the girls couldn't resist, But we were all under 16 years old, parents driving us to gigs and stuff, and but as I say, when Chris Scott, the drummer, got his license, then we started getting around, and we never got further than just the local cities in Massachusetts. Played Boston, played schools. We got well known, and
Were you plugged in, or it was it's electric at that point?
It was a Telecaster. The lead guitarist Dave Perkins played a beautiful Gibson F-hole, and then he was like a jazz player. He played the leads, and Bobby and I played two electric rhythm guitars, a Silvertone and a Telecaster. Had no bass, and we had a fellow named Mike Morgan playing piano and the drums. So we had three guitars. Piano and drums, and that was our band, the Cupids. So that's the first type of music I started to perform in public, other than singing a few ukulele songs at parties or something like that. But what happened was in the explosion of music that started to happen at that time in like 1959, there's Elvis exploding, and then this other stream of music's going on, and that is what they started calling folk music. I first heard, a friend of mine had a record by Leadbelly, and I started listening to Leadbelly, and he had a record by Josh White, and these were all black singers, performers of blues, but it wasn't blues like predominant, like a Chicago blues or something like that, a predominant blues style. It was more like it was acoustic, and Leadbelly himself played the 12-string guitar. And I loved Leadbelly's songs. I learned all his tunes, as many people did. Learned a bunch of them, Well, the preacher went to hunting, Lord, Lord, Lord. Lord, Lord, Lord. But another guy who really caught my ear was a man named Josh White. And Josh was from Greenville, South Carolina, and he had gone to New York and become very successful, and even done some theater. But when he came out in the 30s as a really young black guitar player out of Greenville, South Carolina, he had followed a guy around, and he was a blind man, a lead boy. And he had learned how to play from this blind man on the streets, and
Josh did.
Josh White,
Wow.
yeah.
Wow.
I mean, a lot of people see Josh got caught up in the whole McCarthy era House Un-American Activities thing, and he kind of lost face with the urban white folk crowd. But actually, I got to meet Josh in my first year in college. Because I was probably the only guitar player in my class. The upperclassmen who'd been around and kind of had the folk music thing going on up at Colgate University, they kind of adopted me, And I didn't hang out with my own classmates that much, although there are some couple that I still see today that were my compatriots. But the older upper class guys, they were upperclassmen, they had a different social life, you go to school. I went to school when I was 18. And
sure.
These guys were 19, 20. And that's always been the way, is that I started hanging out with older kids, older young adults, and they had a more savoir-faire about things. And when Josh White came and played at Colgate University, they said, let's go see Josh downstairs. They wanted to introduce me, and I would never on my own have even thought of.
They hipped you to it, though, yeah.
No, but they said, no, you can go down and see him, it's cool, One of the guys was on the entertainment committee, so he said, come on, and then went and met Josh, and I sat and played for the first time with somebody. First guy I ever played with who was a professional was Josh White. And backstage, in the basement of the chapel of Colgate University.
Wow. What year is this?
This would be 61 or 60.
Were you hip to the idea? Were you hip to what happened to Paul Robeson and Peekskill with Seeger and those? I mean, you talked about the Red Scare. Those guys. Can you talk about those musicians?
Well, I know this for a fact.
Yeah.
I mean, Josh White Jr. was Josh's son, and he's, every time I've seen him, well, it's been a while now, but he said, "Yeah, my dad always remembers you," because I said, "Man, I got with your dad, and he was so great." He said, "Yeah, he talked about you." Well, I was, it wasn't like crossing the color barrier,
Yeah.
but it was crossing a political barrier because poor Josh. I'll tell you what happened. Josh White, Pete Seeger, Paul Robeson, Sonny Terry, and Brownie McGee were all black blues musicians hanging out in New York with the likes of Woody Guthrie and, well, with Pete Seeger. And at that time, the communist movement was going on among the people of sort of an alternative cultural point of view, questioning... basically, it was a workers' rights, and Woody, he fell into it. He didn't invent it. He found an audience in the Depression era, or Dust Bowl era, immigrants.
Sure.
And he's from Oklahoma, so when he got to the West Coast, he found an audience, and then he started writing about him. You know what I mean? At first, it was those people listened to him. But he immediately started writing for them.
Once he got to know them.
Yeah. Once he got it was a labor movement. It was people out of work.
Unionization, yeah, totally.
All that.
Yeah.
And from the Wobblies,
Wow.
Utah Phillips talks about that. And Utah Phillips, the golden voice of the Southwest.
Wow.
I asked him about it. I said, did Woody Guthrie ever join the Communist Party? And he said, they wanted him. But Woody could never get the paperwork done.
But they were that milieu of guys turned out to be a political threat to white.
It was New York, and so just a train ride away down in Washington D.C., Eugene McCarthy and the House Un-American Activities are looking at all these people. Dalton Trumbo,
Right.
I know his grandson, and. All these creative people who had been at a party with somebody, had been seen somewhere, they weren't like promoting communism, but they were just promoting an open-minded view of how do you solve the problems in society. But, with any government, it's top-heavy in terms of control and authority, right? The government is the top-heavy part, and the citizens underneath have to obey.
And the question is, do the people at the top really want to have solutions, Or is it better just to keep people separated?
I don't know. It's too complicated. And now we're seeing the results of all that. And
Right.
But, I've seen that the Secretary of Indian Affairs or...
Land, yeah. Native American woman,
Native
yeah.
American, and she's going around healing all these wounds, man. They're returning artifacts and remains to the families.
Explain to people that would say, who cares about that? Why is that significant for the completion of the healing cycle?
Well, it's about human attachment. It's just that none of it has ultimate meaning in terms of... only in terms of human perception.
Dig.
For generations of human perception, the return of artifacts that were stolen from the Native American people will be a return to, you could say identity, but it's like we all treasure our heritage in some way. We may not agree with all our heritage, but you may have a ring from your grandfather that you can't even say what it is. It's not your identity. It's just a passing through generations. And as human beings, that's important to human beings. Everything from even the Buddhist traditions of Tibet that, teach us that we are not identified with our nationality or our race or even our families are not our identity. Our true identity is the vast open-minded awareness of enlightened energy that is the human heritage. But at the same time, on the relative level, we have to feed and clothe and honor the traditions that have brought us here. Yeah, this is the human heritage. And so, and it's the same thing with the music, going back to Josh White. When he was called to, give evidence of the House on American Activities, he called Pete Seeger. And he said, Pete, they got me. Here's a black man in America, and he said, they got me. I got to go to D.C. If I don't, they'll put me in jail. And Pete Seeger said, speak freely, Josh. He said, we have nothing to fear. Just be open, tell them the truth. In other words, don't be caught in lies to protect the people that, you were at parties with, and stuff like that. And so, but Josh, unfortunately, because he did speak freely, was sort of blackballed in a moral sort of kind of.
What was he honest about that alienated him?
He said who was at the parties and who was there, and
Wow.
Pete Seeger was there, and Pete told him to say he didn't want to see him get caught in.
Totally.
They had Josh somehow under the gun. Whereas other people might have said, I refuse to answer on the grounds that it may incriminate me, they had him on a different kind of pressure. And so during the folk music world that evolved after that, he played great concerts and stuff, but he was beyond the coffee house circuit. That was the thing. And there wasn't much except the Newport Folk Festival at the time. And already the people were moving on to people like Mance Lipscomb, more authentic people who were basically farmers. Josh White was a show business professional, and he had reached great heights, but he still performed and everything, The first people I heard when my mother dropped me at the MTA before I had my license was still during the rock and roll period of the Cupids, but I started to hear about these people playing. She dropped me at the MTA station in Dedham, Massachusetts.
Mass transit.
Yeah. And I went to a place called the Golden Vanity. And
it
was Sonny, Terry, and Brownie McGee.
Oh, man.
And it was so casual. I walked in. Of course, I was a good hour and a half early. And and the club owner said, just go ahead upstairs and say hi. I just said, I'm here to, but I was there before any doors, probably even wasn't a cover. It was probably like a guarantee based on the sales of coffee, which was great. Coffee house, you didn't have to worry about alcohol.
Absolutely.
And it wasn't a bar. And so I went upstairs and I met them, and we stayed friends. Sonny was kind of like the wizard, he was like all-knowing. He was blind. He had that awareness about him of, but Brownie was the verbal one, And I remember I was sitting there with them in the bedroom. They were staying at the club upstairs. And it was time for them to go on. I remember Brownie McGee goes, "Old River," and from the next bedroom over you hear, playing on the harp, and they went down and did that on stage, And at the time they were, they had been in New York with the Woody Guthrie crowd, the Weavers and all that. And now they were on their own enjoying the fruits of folk music revival. But, those guys worked and worked and worked. Yeah.
And they made it. Yeah, I mean, Peter and I have been checking out some different programs, television stuff today, and one guy that we saw, I wanted you to talk about the first time you saw Cornell Dupree with the Save the Whales benefit, because that was revelatory. You were there with C Train.
No, it was a group of people put together to go to Japan. Jackson Browne, Warren Zevon, Fred Neal from Florida.
Oh my
Swimming
God.
with the dolphins in the
dude.
sea.
Fred
Wavy
Neal.
gravy. And there was a young kid up here who was involved, I think, with KPFA, being a DJ there, and he took some family money and bought everybody the tickets.
Wow.
And they they took in some money in Japan, but just to rent the hall would have been expensive. Somehow they put it all together. We went there, and there were films shown and exhibits shown about whaling and protecting the life of the great leviathans of the sea, because at the time it was a slaughter going on, and it was kind of over the top. But when you aside from the aspect of greed, when you think about the people of Japan recovering after World War II, they didn't have very much, and the ocean was one place where they could find some resources of protein,
Sure.
They were so thoroughly beaten. The culture was not destroyed, but they didn't have any food.
There's no urban commerce there. There was no field. Yeah.
Nothing. And the mafia. These mafia groups started taking over. Both the U.S. government occupation army and Japanese. That was the beginning of the yakuza, the mafias. And again, you're going to get that anytime there's the family, the extended family, or the society is threatened. People will rise to power. We've seen it here in America. People feel threatened, and suddenly there's a rise to power of authoritarianism, and we thought it couldn't happen here, So,
But Cornell.
So Cornell Dupree. So, but I have to say that
go ahead.
Leadbelly's music, in the pines where the sun never shines, and I shivered when the cold wind blows. Okay, I'm learning Leadbelly stuff, and then one day I'm at the record store, and they let you listen to records in the record booth, and I go, oh, here's Bill Monroe. Okay, what's this all about? And I hear, in the pines, and I'm suddenly like, wow, I can get into this tradition. It's got harmony, and I just, there was a hesitation for me to adopt the blues as my form of music. But right around that time, somebody played me a record by Lightning Hopkins that begins like this. Penitentiary Blues. Whoa, big Brazos, here I come. Hard doing time for another man when there ain't a thing poor Lightning done.
Yep.
When I heard that changed everything for me. And that's been the backbone of even my love for bluegrass, was that feel.
That feel was what was differentiating it between before and after that? I mean, what was the difference there? Because you saw no delineation between country and blues.
No, it's not that.
Yeah.
It's just that I hadn't learned enough music to understand the categories, but it was the Alan Lomax collections.
Absolutely.
That, put it this way, it wasn't categorized as much in the marketplace at that point. So to hear Bill Monroe and to hear Leadbelly was like all related in my mind. To hear Buddy Holly and Hank Williams wasn't quite the same. The country had its own thing. Rock and roll was very hopeful. It was about, come on, let's go, little darling, again, and whereas country is, we've been there, we've done that.
Right.
It's a mess.
It's a haul. Yeah, it's a real haul, man. So it was rock and roll was sprightly and uplifting
at the
and
time, yeah. And Fats Domino was dominating the airwaves, and he just hit after hit of this New Orleans piano playing, and the Dave Bartholomew Band.
Hippest cat ever, man.
And do you know that those guys were all jazz musicians?
Absolutely.
And in interviews I've read, they didn't know what to do with Fats. They go, well, I would. At first, they started playing with brushes. The drummer was just playing with brushes. He played along with the old barrel house style. But it was that drummer who came up with what they started to call the big beat.
Sure.
Where he started to lay the backbeat in heavy, and it happened on one song. And after that, it was like, that's where we go. And then Little Richard showed up, and his whole sessions with the same band, or a lot of the same players, were all emphasized with the big backbeat.
So the loud backbeat came in at that time.
Yeah. Even Bill Haley and the Comets, they were like a Western swing band, and they didn't use the backbeat, they just had the kind of shuffle going on with the drums. And it was country music, really, but everybody wanted that beat,
But also you weren't afraid to, because nothing was categorized, it was okay to vacillate and move over between styles much easier.
You had Blue Suede Shoes written and played by Carl Perkins. Then you had Pat Boone recording the same song. Little different, but it was wonderful to hear covers of songs.
You dug that? Because I thought that was kind of like, I remember Jack Cassidy telling me he was like, it just was bizarre because there was all that the Payola scandal. There was a Hank Ballard and the Midnighters. You had this raunchy R&B, and then all these covers were being done by Pat Boone.
No, I know.
Yeah.
Pat Boone. But
but at that time, maybe it was not. Today, it just sounds.
No. In retrospect, it's even. But at the time, it sounded very strange. But in retrospect, it's like so great. It's so great that, and it's all commercial. It's all based on greed. We can sell more records if Pat does this, but so it became the whole search for authenticity and hipness. That's what started to develop, Certain artists were hip and others weren't. But, the barriers kept falling because, Muddy Water plays Newport and just rocks the place,
Sure.
Bob Dylan picks up the electric guitar and he goes in a different direction. It was happening. John Hammond Jr. was a fantastic songman, still alive today.
Wow.
He knows songs. He's the guy to talk to. Because his dad, basically signed Bob Dylan and Bruce Springsteen to Columbia Records. But John Hammond
and George Benson and Denny Zeitlin and that guy was.
But John Hammond Jr.
Yeah.
He adopted the blues, which I never had the nerve to do. But now, now I just do it because it's the most beautiful music.
Wow.
Because John would, show enough, And I was talking to Maria Mulder about that, and I said, "Did you ever feel self-conscious, doing a Memphis Mini song?" And she said, "Well, you had to adopt the language. You had to speak Creole, or you had to speak
right,
whatever." Now, if like I go to Louisiana, and I sing a Cajun song, I'm gonna have to sing it with like I speak French, not like I'm mouthing the words, and that I've received a lot of criticism for that. Even, using a bit of an Irish brogue, singing an Irish song, and it can be overdone, but was a huge cliche here in America too. The whole Irish tenor thing, but how are you going to sing, Well, I suppose you could just, I don't know. It's always a thing. It's like, bluegrass too is a Southern music, and for the language to sing, you have to find where those the vowels, the open sounds come in. Sweetheart of mine, can't you hear me calling? I'm going to say, can't you hear me calling? Because that's really how the words go. It's not, sweetheart of mine, can't you hear me calling? That's like that.
Right.
Can't you hear me calling?
How Dolphy was very affected and personally by the criticism that he received. You
Who,
talk
Eric Dalton?
Eric Dalton, yeah. And I wanted you to talk about how you've dealt going out on a limb, doing stuff where you get criticized, and how you've used that as motivation, or how it's affected you in your career. Because that infringed on a lot of really heavy jazzers. They took it to heart, and I wanted to know how you dealt with it. I mean, you don't, you know.
Here's an example. When I went to Jamaica and recorded reggae music, sure, they're happy that I'm there, going to spend some money, and everybody's going to get to play. But the quality of music is so high.
Right.
And nobody in Jamaica ever put me down. I remember I sang No Woman No Cry at the old Lone Star Cafe in New York, and this black guy came up and said, "Man, that's cool you doing Mali." And I said, "Yeah, I don't know. I can't really get a hold of it." Like, he goes, "No, man, you have to be a reggae king." The black people telling me that I got to be more get into the culture, be part of it. And, I mean,
I've heard you play that live with Bela Fleck in '85. You were
yeah,
belting it out, man.
We did it bluegrass.
I dig it, man.
We did it every possible way. But here's another example. When I started playing with Flaco Jimenez,
yeah,
really deep Tex-Mex music from South Texas. We went to England. It was all, here it was just like, wow, that's different. We got to England, and immediately there's a cultural criticism that I, a white person, am playing in a band with Spanish-speaking musicians. And I got some really harsh criticism for that.
What would they be? What just that you didn't belong, or you were an imposter? What was the criticism?
I think it was just, I wasn't of that tradition. I wasn't this sounds crude, but one person, I asked somebody, I said, what is the problem? Flaco and I play a lot together, and people like it. And I said, what do you think the criticism is? And this guy he just said, well, Pete, you don't have the spick appeal. And I thought, my God, that is just the grossest, that's an insult,
It was pretty overt, yeah.
To say that,
that's
not
right,
to
yeah.
me.
No, I did.
But to the
totally.
Spanish heritage, But I think it was that they were differentiating, like maybe my bluegrass feel with the Tex-Mex feel, which, as from a musical point of view, it's just a work in progress.
Absolutely.
And
no borders.
True. It's true, but those borders, they'll keep putting them up. But the difference is now I play with Los Tex-Maniacs, who all have learned from Flaco, and they're another generation, and they speak mostly English, but they have Spanish language too. Whereas all of Flaco's players spoke in Spanish most of the time. That was a generation of the 50s. And nowadays, I'm playing with folks that have played with Flaco, in fact, learned from Flaco, learned the whole music from Flaco. And because I played with Flaco, they consider me a part of the music.
That's right.
They don't differentiate that much. And that's a happy thing to come back to be playing Tex-Mex influenced music. Well, I mean, they're a Tex-Mex band. It's going to sound like Tex-Mex music. But my music, what I've always felt and been happy was that the songs are strong enough to be interpreted in different ways, which I just enjoy doing. I enjoy playing Midnight Moonlight as a bluegrass tune. I enjoy playing Midnight Moonlight as a Tex-Mex a flavored tune, and it's all natural because it all came from that juxtaposition of the culture. Anyway, I just think that my path is a long path, and I'm given time here on the earth to fulfill this path. Right? It didn't happen all of a sudden in my 20s, and there's too many elements at play.
Let me just. I mean, what? Before we wrap, I just wanted to ask you about when you play gigs now. You just came back from some gigs, and are your intentions still the same? Is it about touching people's hearts? What? what is your intentions when you play live, and have they changed since the pandemic? I mean, you were playing with a
No,
Yeah.
they've just gotten stronger.
And what are they?
Well, it is to reach people's hearts. Yeah, it is, and also because I had so much time to work on my guitar playing during the pandemic, to be playing lead and Telecaster again, it's like back to square
I
one.
love it.
You know, but we
MTA.
you know, and in the shows, I play acoustic guitar in the beginning, and we kind of move into it slowly with some very deep ballads that I've recorded before with Flacco, and then the Tex Maniacs play their stuff, and then I come back in, and but I like being on the bandstand. I like not having to go away and coming back and being featured as me. I like just being part of the music. Yeah.
Well, I think that's kind of what it's about. I think some people have to decide, coming out of it, they've learned how to monetize virtually, but it's not the same as being on the bandstand.
Well, we talked about that before. Learning on the bandstand.
Well, Bill Monroe. I mean. By the way, but did he? I just want to be clear, because the late great Byron, that Bill really was bothered by Vassar's improv and the way he would turn tunes inside out. But I mean, was that the only difference, or was it more of a personality thing?
Well, I don't think it was something Bill would have harped on.
Mm-hmm.
But Byron, as a fiddle player, might have asked the question. Because we all were looking back at Bill's heritage of Bluegrass Boys, and each person had brought something to it. I mean, I could ask Bill Monroe about Jimmy Martin. He'd say he did fine, and that would be the answer. And he would never disclose the tensions or anything like that caused a rift in their friendship. But if I'd asked Jimmy Martin, he'd say, Bill said that's the sound he wanted. And I said, and I was his man, and he said that's the best he's ever sounded. He said that's all he wanted was what I did with him, and that's Jimmy Martin's words. And Jimmy, left the band and came back. And Bill, I think, saw something in Jimmy Martin that reached this. I mean, everything that they recorded was really that modal kind of thing, like Memories of Mother and Dad. Mother left this world of song. That's the harmony note. Sorrow. Really, it's a blues thing, but it comes out of a mountain tradition. And then, of course, there's just the straight ahead blueness of Bill's approach. Bill said,
No, you told me this story. The great line. He goes, "If I never invented bluegrass, I'd just be a blues band."
Yeah, I would have been a blues man, but I invented bluegrass.
I want to make sure we get this posted online. I love you, Rowan. All right, before my battery dies, keep swinging on the bandstand. It's the Jake Feinberg Show. See you later.